Hello and welcome to the Permaculture Vine Podcast. We're today back with Cresol Permaculture in their Mastermind Group. I'm your host, Cormac Harkin. That's Neal there. And we have one a bit from left field, but it'll all make sense in the end. So we have Aron and Sorcha on from, what do you call it, Candldelit Tales.
Yep.
And just a full disclaimer here to start, they're Neal's brother and sister, is that right?
Correct.
Yep.
Yeah. So today we're going to talk about land use in Celtic mythology, storytelling from a sort of cultural perspective about humanity, and the importance of storytelling. That's how we tie it back into permaculture. How as we owners of ethical businesses tell our stories, and what can we learn from Candldelit Tales. So do you want to just introduce yourself, Neal, there quickly first?
Yeah, well, I'm Neal. Hopefully people on the Vine podcast know me by now. And so I run a permaculture design company. And I'm delighted. This is a growing family business. I'm finding more and more ways to rope my family into this. My mother, for quite a while, has been doing a lot of the artwork for our designs and for my design students' projects. And now I'm delighted to be joined by my brother Aron, my sister Sorcha, aka Candldelit Tales. So yeah, welcome guys.
Yeah, Aron, do you want to introduce yourself there?
Yeah, thanks so much, guys. So I'm the youngest of this trio, and having an older brother and sister that have paved the way ahead of me has been an interesting journey. I've been working very closely with my sister for the past nearly 11 years now, starting telling stories, Irish myths in pubs with music. I wanted to be a performer. I still want to always perform, and I'll never stop wanting to do that. And I love all aspects of it, and storytelling was the thing that we had in common between Sorcha and I. She used to read me, and still does read me stories from occasion, and she was the one who taught me so much about mythology, about the fundamentals of story, of storytelling, of meaning making, of how to create meaning from a narrative or bits of information to narrativize it. And we've been doing this, continuing from pub to podcast to courses that we started online. And my sister Sorcha can introduce herself. She's been a writer. We usually actually do this the other way around, didn't you? She's a writer.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like you talked me up a good bit there. That's Aron who does himself down a little bit. I feel like when he starts talking about me, and Neal paving the way for him. Aron who is a brilliant actor and extremely talented performer, who shares with me just a little obsession about Irish mythology that we both had cooking for years, kind of since childhood. And we started Candlelit Tales, nearly 11 years ago in a pub. And it has morphed in ways that we have not always been terribly consciously guiding it in, but we have sort of followed it as it flowed and gone where it led. So we are currently still telling stories live in live performances. We have a podcast. We've recently written a book that comes out in August. And we also train people in the art of storytelling, which started during lockdown when we weren't able to perform and we were going stir crazy, and now has become like a solid little pillar of what we do.
And a pillar of meaning as well, I suppose. It's been really meaningful to see these stories have an effect on people in lockdown, help them guide them towards traditions and customs and the oral spoken tradition of telling these stories to each other and together, and to also calibrate us towards, this is an offering to really help people formulate great narratives from learning what we have, but also learning from what we've learned all out of mythology. And it's a constant source of inspiration and creation. So we just keep on going back to that well and digging. And yeah, Sorcha also does herself down quite a lot by not bigging herself up.
You both do.
Yeah.
Both.
We both.
The Tales, check them out. What do you guys have, like 40 bazillion followers on YouTube now?
No, 10.
10,000. We recently hit 10,000. It was a big milestone.
It was quite a milestone.
Congratulations.
Well, how many podcast downloads?
38,000 This month we have had 38,700 and something crazy hours of viewing. So that's fucking nuts. I just saw
Yeah,
that.
there you go.
What?
This month.
This month.
What's wrong with people? Don't they know about MTV?
There's a lot of stories there and a lot of ways to tell them. We've always just been, I think we've always followed the breadcrumbs of what interests me
Yeah.
and what's meaningful and how to belong to a group and a community of storytellers and creators. And it's been very interesting. I'm the youngest, learning from both my elder siblings in two different kind of ways. And
I agree, we're amazing.
I was gonna jump off into like, this is an interesting way to bring it back to like why we're tiny students. In some ways, you could say Neal's gone off a completely different direction in studying permaculture, and Sorcha and I have been following stories. But we were just chatting before this. We were like, oh, actually, all story analysis is recognizing patterns and patterns of emotion, patterns of structure, patterns of rise and fall, the continuation of these ways of looking at structure of story and archetypal structure and archetypes within the stories. These are all patterns and pattern recognition, and you get to know them really well. And when you're telling a story to a 5-year-old and making it up on the spot, you just see what needs to fit in, and you need a rise and a fall and a problem and an obstacle and something, a solution, and you need a few more of those before he falls asleep.
This is crazy, by the way. If anyone's a parent, I know we're actually not starting where we're supposed to be starting, Cormac. So
go with that's good stuff.
I literally watch my 4.5-year-old is the most oppositional kid in the world.
Oh, yeah.
I have to like normally hog tie him and get him into the bathroom and like coerce him into brushing his teeth and getting into bed. He was running around the lawn last night,
as he does every night before he goes to bed.
And
Running
Aron
around.
started telling him a story, and he just immediately sat down. And then after about 10 minutes of them being out on the lawn, I said to him, okay, if you want the end of this story, you got to go up, brush your teeth, and put on your pajamas. He walked up the stairs on his own, brushed his teeth, and put his pajamas on and got into bed.
We got him.
I've never seen that. So, like, in terms of like favorable outcomes for learning storytelling, that should be enough for most people. But Cormac, maybe I'll bring it back to the structure you'd proposed, and I think before we get into the benefits of learning about storytelling, one of the things that Bill Mollison was at pains to point out in the kind of invention of permaculture, discovery of permaculture, was that culture itself is sort of an emergent property of the way people manage land. And like, he was very much in favor of the idea of integrating the best practices from like hunter-gatherers, horticulturalists, agriculturalists, pastors, and using them to create like a culture that could endure permanently was his idea. And it was, people debate that in the last part about like how permanent can a culture be, and that whole thing. But it's very interesting because while we can kind of guess as to how cultures were in hunter-gatherer times or horticulture times or whatever, we are really only just guessing, and history becomes a very blurry thing to really look at. But actually, mythology, what you realize, is kind of a window into prehistory. And so I'd love to start by asking questions like what threads are there into prehistory, and how culture changed as land management on the island of Ireland changed?
Oof.
Yeah. Well, like I think that's a really good question. I think it's a really interesting question because like we have a fairly well preserved there are some ruptures in it, but we have some fairly well preserved threads in the mythology. And we also have an extraordinary body in Ireland that is called the Brehon Law, which is an older legal system, which actually tells us a lot. It's referenced in the mythology a lot. It also started to be written down eventually in around the 11th century. So we have like some very old manuscripts, some of which are translated and some of which aren't, but which I think point to some really interesting ways in which the culture and the land management were very, very fundamentally intertwined in ways that are very different from what we do these days. So a big part of kind of Celtic Ireland was what we would probably call silvopasture, where they were, raising cattle, not for meat, primarily for dairy. The Celts were dairy farmers. They didn't really slaughter cattle except on very special occasions. What they did was they followed the herds. The word in Irish for road is boher, which means the way the cow goes. So our earliest roads were made by the cattle moving through the forest and through the bogs, and followed by the people. There were traditions of, moving the cattle to the summer pastures and down into the winter pastures, but it was essentially people following the cattle as they foraged in their different tuas, in their different areas of land. And people were quite, it was extremely clan-based. It was extremely community-based. So you had the ordinary people of ancient Ireland were called the Féini. They were the just the common people. And they lived in tuas, they lived in family groups. You actually still have that word in Irish. If you say you're living in the countryside, you say, Táim Magoni Fuin Tua, I am living under the tua, which means the extended family tribe. It means the community that you live in. And the Féini didn't really move around very much. The Féini kind of stayed in their areas. The people who did move around, and the people who were incredibly important for cultural, social cohesion, were the storytellers and the bards and the brehons. So there was an educated class of people, mostly orally educated, who travelled around the countryside. Brehons settled disputes. Bards and poets, Philly, told stories and told certain stories at certain times. Myself and Aron have both had this experience of, like, sometimes you don't know what the right story is for the community until you turn up and you see them and you see what they need, and then you will tell them the story that they need to hear. And the bodies of mythology that had to be memorized were quite extensive. So that's my kind of brief overview of.
It's a great overview
of
what was kind of codified, and like I kind of like taking a step back in terms of like, where does this mythology almost come from? And it's so intuitive to be a storyteller. That's what sets us apart from the animal kingdom. We came up with stories, and that's how we kind of were able to create the world that we wanted to interact with to suit us in a lot of ways. And we gathered belief systems and got people together to just plant stuff because it's going to grow, guys. Come on, let's literally start some agriculture. But the landscape of Ireland is very interesting. The landscape of all indigenous cultures are fascinating when you get to scratch the surface. And an awful lot of our ancient megalithic, thousands of years old. I spent the summer solstice up in Carrowkeel, 5,000 years old. It's older than the Newgrange, and they're aligned to the setting sun of the solstice. And the different monuments in different places are aligned to the different, places of the setting of the sun and different times of year. And what they marked was the times to plant and the times to sow and the times to harvest and the times to celebrate and the times to go inwards more and more, and people, neo-paganism is a whole way of reframing that to suit people's beliefs. Now, we don't really know what exactly they were doing by doing this, but we know that as long as people have been in this island, they've been looking at that thing, figuring out how to wield the power of the sun to survive here. And a lot of the customs or stories that have survived from peoples that didn't make them, now remember, it's people who came and probably found them, but again, it's listening to the land, it's listening to the way of the world and connecting to it and figuring out meaning that makes sense to basically create a tribe and a culture and survive on this land, which seems lovely during the summer and not so nice in the dark half of the year, and needs.
Which I think is really worth saying for people who aren't familiar with Ireland or haven't lived in Ireland. The difference between summer and winter on this island is drastic. We are now in midsummer, and there's maybe about 4 hours of complete darkness. It's a very, very long twilight, and you get
my kid is like,
winter.
Dad, we're not going home. You get that, right? We're staying here. And I'm like, you don't know what you're saying.
Yeah.
You have not experienced the 3 p.m. sunset as you're coming home from primary school, when you went into school as the sun was rising and you come home as the sun is setting. So
Yeah.
the sun is shining into your eyes both directions.
But I guess
Because
so
that's winter in Ireland.
yeah, so the Wheel of Year is fascinating because it sounds very similar to what they have in Mayan culture, kind of with the Nawal system and the different energies of the different days. Um,
Again, that was better kind of kept for, in terms of a specific thing in some ways.
yeah, a lot of it was
I
rediscovered though. But I was
Yeah.
talking
Yeah.
more about like say, if I hear myths like Oisin leaves Ireland, goes to Tir na Nog with Niamh, and he comes back and very little time has passed for him, but the island has changed irreparably, right? And that to me is a story when I hear it about um, the forests and the game and the wildlands being replaced by
Yeah.
pasture and sheep, and the subsequent
Mhm.
kind of sort of shriveling up and weakening of the people as they become domesticated as well,
Yeah.
and also of the introduction of like monotheism, I guess you would call it. So it's a move also from kind of animism.
Mhm.
Um, and like, so obviously that move took place. And then also what happened with Brehon Law as that move took place. And, what
Yeah.
those types of things are interesting as well. And what happened to the sort of like the clan structure, the family structure, where did that all fit in along that timeline?
A lot of that persisted. It changed kind of gradually under Christianity, but like you see it a lot. A really interesting way to map it actually is if you look at women's rights, because women's rights in ancient Celtic Ireland and pre-Celtic Ireland, women had, you know, more rights than we do today in some parts, in a lot of parts of the world. Like extremely powerful, like expected to be in the public sphere as well as in the private sphere, extremely respected, expected to be rulers.
Yeah, it
You
was a
see them in the
matriarchal
mythology.
society in Celtic culture,
Yeah,
basically.
it was well, the Celts were more patriarchal, but the indigenous group here before the
All right,
Celts
before the
were
Celts.
matriarchal, which we have like they've done archaeological digs now and they've confirmed that they were matriarchal.
In
So
terms of where the female is buried and the rest of them around them, right? Sorry, that was that.
yes, so just to kind of briefly say what I mean by matriarchal, because I think people think of matriarchy as like a flip of patriarchy, where it's women on top and men at the bottom,
Mhm.
and it isn't. It's just it's a different kind of way of organizing things altogether.
They should
In a
come up with
matriarchal,
a different name for it then, because
honestly, as soon as you start naming these things,
it's
they
like
become
it sounds
problematic.
like that's exactly what it is.
Go on,
Yeah, well, as soon
explain,
as you
start
start
with
naming these
yourself.
things, people get upset about them and don't think about what they mean and just start arguing.
Right.
But briefly, in matriarchal clan structures, the children live with their mother, the extended family lives with the grandmother, and the movement of people is, the sons will go off and maybe join a different tribe or maybe come back or join a different tribe temporarily and then come back. Marriage is not terribly important. Fatherhood is not terribly important. It's more uncles raising their sisters' kids and like everybody kind of in together. And there tends to be a lot less confinement as to what roles different people can occupy. So you tend to get less prescription about like, well, that's a woman's job and that's a man's job. Under matriarchy, there's just jobs that need to be done.
Yeah.
And the people who can do them.
Okay, so we go from that.
The really short history is occupation, first of all, and then like
Well,
you want to blame
yeah,
Christianity more than the occupation. The occupation was the big thing that happened in Ireland.
devastating. And Christianity kind of uneasily lay with that for a while and did start to sort of overtake it and did start to come in. And you did get a move away from that sort of silver
And
pasture
I'm
to
I'm
agriculture.
curious. It's like in that kind of matriarchal society, like people are hunting, like so the
People are
men are going off and hunting basically.
Well, so are the women. We also know from more
Okay.
recent reframings of archaeology that this idea of man as hunter and as woman as gatherer was always actually false. That's not what modern hunter-gatherers do. And it's not actually what ancestral hunter-gatherers did either.
100%. Like
What tended to happen
It seems
was
interesting though, because it's so for men don't decide to be
Necessarily.
fathers in this kind of arrangement you're saying.
essentially, yeah. You have a much more kind of open family structure.
Yeah,
So
it
you're
wasn't
not
rigid.
the nuclear family is not as prioritized, which is not to say that men couldn't stay with the mother of their children. It's just that doesn't make them the head of the family. The head of the family is going to be her mom.
Was there a date? Is there a date for this?
This is kind of like very far, like Christianity started coming into Ireland around the 4th century CE.
Yeah, and there's no actual this is kind of speculation as well, essentially, and the myths give us a sort of
a window
into it, basically.
The myths give us a window into it. I mean, I would say it's not speculation because there is like archaeological evidence that this is how the family structures lived.
Right.
And there are documented matriarchal cultures in other parts of the world that follow the same kinds of patterns.
Okay. And they tend to be their sort of hunter-gatherer is their bringing it back to the land management, and then so just keep the thread of like then as the land management changes, and where also along the line does Brehon law emerge, and what is the sort of land management style at that point?
So Brehon law was always emergent. And Brehon law was always changing. So Brehon law was something that was a continually evolving code because it was not a top-down code, it was a bottom-up code. You had these Brehons, and we're talking like maybe 11th century CE now. There were law schools in Ireland that were like where the royalty of Europe, like there are some Viking chieftains who like were educated in Ireland, and it was a huge status symbol to be educated in Ireland because they had to memorize everything. They didn't really rely on writing very much. But these Brehons would memorize legal codes, memorize precedents, and go from community to community settling disputes. And then every year gather together and discuss what things had come up that they didn't have a precedent for, if anything. So it was a continually evolving legal code. And that's going back, like that is going from prehistory into history up to it actually hasn't been repealed in Ireland. It's actually still a valid legal code. And there have been cases where people have successfully used it.
Class. I love that.
Which is cool.
It is cool. So I guess like the insight we get from this, Cormac, is like the oldest stories that were written down in Ireland are the known as the Book is the Lower Gawala, and that's 1100 what is it?
11th century CE.
11th century CE. And so that's the oldest book of stories that we have. And again, it tells about all of the peoples. It's called the Book of Invasions, and it's the stories of the peoples who came here. But like the way that essentially they were Christian monks write them down gives us an insight into what they knew, what kind of warriors were, what codes were in the culture, what they dressed like, what they ate like, what was considered fine dining and brilliant adventures. Of course, a lot of it was extremely imaginative and mad chases and amazing adventures, but it did also tell the stories of the peoples who came here, interacted with Ireland, and the first was a woman as well, tied into a Noah Ark story. But she was created as our called the granddaughter of Noah, and she made her own arks, and she brought 3 times 50 women, again all women of every single culture from all over the world, with 3 men. So you can see how much they seem to think the people here before them valued men anyway, from that particular story. But then you get these insights, and that's a lot of where you get these extractions from what the Brehons spoke about. One of my favorite things that ties it back into nature is in terms of if you were to fell trees, there were different penalties on what trees you would what penalty you would actually get, and the types of trees were arranged in that the 3 variations, basically the Ahrig Fado, the Fola Fado, and the Eric Fado, the nobles, the commoners, and the What is it again?
I actually have it here. The Eirig Fedo were the nobles of the woods. The Ahig Fedo were the commoners.
The
The
lower, no,
Fola Fedo were the
yeah,
lower divisions.
lower divisions.
And then the Lhasa Fedo were the bushes.
Bushes. Yeah, the bushes.
So you had, you actually, like, this was something that was really interesting in Brehon law because everything had a status, and all infractions, all injuries were calculated by fines. And the higher the status of the offender and the higher status of the offended, the higher the fine. But what was interesting about that was that was also applied to the non-human world. So animals had a status, trees had a status, land had a status. All of these things had a status. And so injuring the land, injuring a noble of the wood was a crime in the same way that injuring a human being would be a crime. And it was judged as a crime by a Brehon, and a penalty was imposed.
Which I think is
just a fundamentally different way of looking at the world. And like that didn't change with Christianity.
Yeah.
Like it might have started as an animistic practice, but because it made sense and because it actually helped the community to consider nature this way, and to consider the non-human world this way, it persisted.
I remember.
And so a lot of actually, sorry, Cormac, did you want to come in with something there?
Yeah, sorry, we're running away with this.
No, Aaron was about to say something there.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was going to say, Cormac, like if you've ever seen someone knock down an oak tree or an ash tree or a hazel, like I get so angry. I used to get so angry when I saw trees getting chopped down when I was a kid. But like, there is something. I even remember a coach of mine. She rang me up saying they're after knocking down all of these yews that grew along outside on her driveway. She lives in an estate, but all along the middle of the kind of the road, there were these yews, and they knocked them all down. They were beautiful. The way yews grow as well. And yeah, you get a lot of place names. Then the Dinshanicus comes a lot from either trees. Derry is literally the Dira, like the oak forest, and you have Mayu, the plane of the yew tree. You've a lot of, again, place names, and the Dinshanicus are these stories that are attached to the place that tell you about the place and what lives there and grows there as well. It's tied in, and that kind of, for me, is that thread where you take narrativization and imagination and creativity, and it links back to the natural world. And that's also where it comes from for me, is a lot of the creativity is interconnected with being a forest or by a river, or how many songs are about waterfalls, guys, like so there's a lot of like co-creation with that kind of space and respect for, and like I think the whole idea of Brehon law and penalising someone for chopping down a tree should be brought back as fucks.
Yeah, definitely be brought back.
Yeah, it would be no harm. So you've definitely, that kind of paints a picture, I guess, of like a culture that had very, like, another definition of permaculture that I think it was Toby Hemingway used, was like, we're attempting to design for an ecologically conscious culture. So like what you're describing there is essentially like a kind of ecologically conscious
100%
culture.
In what was kept. I mean, like, of course, it's always chaos, and there's always ups and downs, and always communities fighting and strife. So like, but in the ideal situation, you had these Brehons, these bards, these people who knew the stories and knew the penalties, and knew that these should be respected. And as Christianity grew here, as pagan beliefs, as suffering, and basically, occupation under British rule and colonization, and the disenfranchisement of our culture and our language was eradicated and destroyed, and moving is swiftly through Irish history here, guys. It just got bleak and bleak and bleak, and a lot of this got rubbed out, fashioned out, and basically pushed out of the country in forced famine and starvation tactics used by colonial oppressions, which is happening today in Gaza, as everyone knows. But all of these things were practiced in Ireland first, and decimated the landscape, decimated our culture, decimated our language. And there was a number of revivals which kind of kicked the British out of our country very briefly, even though some people might say we're still essentially tied into capitalist colonization. But some elements of our culture has been crafted back and linked back to, and that's where we go back to the old stories, find some form of meaning, find some form of access to the wider cosmic realm of mythology and does it mean to belong to this whole earth and not be outside of it, and how to integrate, a story, my own story, your own story, our own collective story into something that's a little bit more cohesive and connected with community, with culture, with story, with something that's more meaningful, and hopefully have these shared ideals promoted between us. And that's when you kind of bring into why we got working together, was because you were trying to figure out how to bring all of the stuff you'd known about permaculture together, but you didn't know how to tell your story.
Well, yeah, we'll get to that. I mean, I think the next thing we were going to talk about was, you know,
Sorry, Nate, just before you move on to the second, but does anybody have any questions
Oh
about
yeah,
that
we've got to
first
take a
section?
pause.
Yeah. My only question would be, so I always tell people that Ireland used to be a temperate rainforest.
Mm.
Is that correct?
Yep. Yes, it is.
Yep,
Yeah.
pretty much.
Owen Dalton has a few suspicious, if you're talking about Owen Dalton's book, I
Yep.
agree with some of what he says, but ultimately this guy bought, he has a book called Ireland, what's the name of the book?
He's taught. I think he calls it the temperate
I
rainforest.
think he calls it, yeah, something like that. And he basically bought a forest or something that had basically a lot of growth, and he left it go wild, and he fenced it off from deer, and he got rid of the invasive species, which there are too much of, both of them in this country. And he just fenced it off and allowed it grow. And his whole idea is if we just let everything grow, it would go back to normal. It would go back to a temperate rainforest.
Yeah.
And I don't really agree. I think there's too much work to be done, because not enough of the tiny 1% that's in Ireland of our natural trees and natural, well, basically forestry is so down to a minor percentage. And the main forestry that is in Ireland right now is pine wood that is non-native and built for export, and they're deserts for biodiversity. Like, they're absolutely awful. And so that we have about 10% forest, but only 1% of that, less than that, is actually native. So it's been stripped so badly, we're gonna have to go back to how do we reintroduce, if we can't just leave it go now. We have to try and collectively get together to plant more trees. And if anyone is
well, I was
interested in the
also
Gaelic Woodland Project, I just mentioned the Gaelic Woodland Project is a charity that is organised by a dear friend of mine, who basically raises money to buy land and plant trees. And that's why I, yeah, happen to know a bit more about this than I used to, because a lot of my friends are quite passionate about trying to reintroduce more, or bring about some change in reforestation, and help the mindset about deer fencing, and invasive species in Ireland too, because that is pretty important here as well. So carry on.
Great stuff. There's no hands up, so Neil, do you want to batter on there?
Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
think the next kind of question I had was on, so the practicality of storytelling, and the first thing that I have, I think, realized to be a very damaging element is the stories that people commonly have about human beings now. And there's very much a kind of move, and I see this a lot in like conservationism. This kind of like, let's just put a fence around everything and like separate humans from nature because we're sort of inherently bad and we should seek to kind of like minimize our impact. Um, and so getting away just from the kind of Celtic history lesson
Mm.
and ethnobotanical stuff, and more into how you guys see storytelling as a tool, essentially, yeah, as a way potentially of like getting people to reframe um their place in the world, and
Yeah.
humanity's place in the world.
Well, I think that narrative is really interesting because I think that narrative is directly a reaction to an older narrative, which is that the earth was created for human beings and it's our playground that was given to us to do whatever the fuck we want with. Um, and I think that there is a very direct reaction to that in that story, which is like, no, it isn't. It's we're bad and we're a plague on it and it's terrible and it's beautiful and pristine and we're awful. But to me, they are two sides of the same coin. And that coin as a whole is incorrect because both of them presuppose a framing that we are separate from nature, that we are not actually part of nature. We are nature. Human beings are nature. Human beings are indivisible from nature. It's like saying we don't have bodies. We are of the earth and we are of the air. If you don't think you're of nature, try living without oxygen. See how long you last. We are absolutely part of it. And we are, we have a lot of capacity. We have a huge capacity as human beings for incredible destruction. But if we have a capacity for destruction, we also have a capacity for creation. So all of that stuff where people see human beings destroying the world, it's not that human beings are not damaging the world and don't damage the world in profound ways. We have an equal, if not greater, capacity to heal it. And I think what Aron was saying about the invasive species, the replanting of trees, the reforesting of trees, done consciously, that is an incredibly powerful movement that we can be part of. And I think, I always go back to the story in the Book of Invasions in the Laura Goala, which is when Kesser first set foot on the land of Ireland, the land celebrated, burst forth 3 lakes in joy that the people had come.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important one to mention in terms of origin and creation story too, because the Irish people didn't see these people, these human beings, as something that was specifically needed to be told how it fell off a tree or how we were made by a god, how we were center of the story. No, we weren't. The land was always center to the story. The land is the main character, and
the land is. Yes, the land is the main character in all of the Book of Invasions. The people come and they die out and they go back and they come back again. They die out. The land is the main character.
Yeah. And when you reframe stories and you change the point of view, you get a very, very interesting kind of set of cause and effect and rise and fall. And if you take it from the point of view of the land, the land remembers, the land retains, the land will survive again. But we're passing through and trying to interact with the land. And that's where culture, story, music, integration with actual old customs comes from, is that like tying to older, or even just that older intuition of just staying with the land. So I think when you came to me, I had a phone call with Sorcha because I think you had all of this experience and all of this knowledge. And I had done 2 PDCs with you at this stage. Been over in Guatemala. I love visiting my brother. It was a great excuse. He's an amazing life set up there. And at the same time, you were struggling to find how to deliver a message, and you were going in a lot of different directions, and you weren't able to kind of like come down onto one. And so, I think Sorcha and I both.
How was that for you, Neal? I think it would be interesting to hear that, like your perspective on what that was like, because Aron can then say what it was that he did to facilitate.
Yeah, exactly.
Before and after.
Yeah, so I had been looking at what you guys were doing, and also realizing that a big part of my job as a permaculture teacher was storytelling, right? And it was essentially getting across this message to my students that, all the things you were saying, Sorcha, that we are actually part of nature, kind of like getting over this guilt, integrating and using the sense of guilt and sadness for the world, like acknowledging that sadness and then turning it into action. But, in terms of like delivering that message, and I'd say I was like struggling honing my craft, but also what I was really got into doing was trying to build a brand, trying to take what I learned to do in Sununa, i.e. design and create farms and homesteads and and community and kind of bring it out to a wider audience. And I started to talk to Aron about the issue of branding, and I'd also been looking at story branding at this stage, and Aron just had it, and I talked to like lots of people over the years who were like, I'm a branding expert and I'll give you this spreadsheet to fill in and blah blah blah, and it all
Hmm.
felt like fairly formulaic. Whereas what Aron really explained to me was a couple of really key things. Like one were the kind of beats of the hero's journey. That it's like if you want people to listen to you, you have to tell the story in the right way. And once it follows this arc of the hero's journey, people will tune in and listen. So like that was like aha moment number one. I was like, oh, okay, I
It's
got it.
it is almost formulaic because we are prone to the rise and the fall of the sun and the moon, like
Yeah.
we know how a story goes.
And so once I kind of understood that, and then I started to listen to more of your guys' story, I started to be like, oh right, yeah, yeah, yeah. This is like I'm getting pulled into this. And then and it
And there
actually
was some lovely moments in I think the first two trips I had over, we had open mic nights and we kind of did some storytelling nights. And it was probably the first time where I felt a lot more comfortable as a younger brother bringing Neil into like kind of almost going, okay, you got this, you got to go this, you're telling this story. So I was on training mode and he was on receiving mode. He's usually the teacher for me for, all the
yeah,
permaculture, the farming
oh
stuff.
yeah, we rocked it on a
Yeah,
couple of those
yeah.
stories. And but that was also like, again, another revelation for me, and just seeing how good you had gotten at commanding an audience, and like emceeing basically. And there's another core skill in that, which is like just like mind-blowingly useful actually. But the thing that I really, really never thought about, and I think almost nobody thinks about in the whole world of kind of like branding and whatnot, is archetypes, right? And like what archetype, not necessarily do you see yourself as, but do you wish to emulate, right? And we sort of talked a lot about,
Well,
the journey I had been on and whatnot. And
yeah, and just to pick up from where you're going, like all of that came out of conversation. I eventually sat down with Neil and after a good long chat with Sorcha as well to bring him through that kind of the process of beating it out and looking at structure. And ultimately, I wanted to get as much information to then reflect back to him what archetype I see that he's trying to step into,
right,
and it was very clear to me that there's a very brilliant story about a character, like archetype. It's a Jungian kind of theory to put on psychology.
Yeah,
Sorcha, maybe you
I
want to fill that in
I
briefly?
think the easiest way to explain it for me is there are patterns. There
Mm,
are patterns in global mythology, and there are patterns that are not easily explained by cultural cross communication. And so Jung theorized that these were, universal subconscious patterns, and that essentially, as dream was to the individual, so myth was to the culture.
brilliant.
And
There we go.
really, some, archetypal, you get archetypal characters, you also get archetypal story structures, you get archetypal tropes. There are different ways of looking at it, but they are essentially the
recurring
easiest way to understand them is that they are patterns. They are
recurring
recurring
patterns,
patterns.
yeah,
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 brilliant. Thank you.
which
And
is what you have throughout nature as well. And so again,
Hmm.
like,
it's why it's so intuitive, and it's why it is a pattern, and these things, everything rises and falls. Everything
Yeah.
gets to that pattern.
And as Aron is saying, pattern recognition is like a large part of storytelling as well, as being like, oh, it's that kind of story, and now I remember it without having to remember it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so yeah, I told the little man a quest story last night, and as soon as I knew it was a quest, exactly how it's gonna go. And it was interesting to hear Neil talk. And here's a man who, in some ways, went off on the journey, the great trip across the ocean. He went into the other world in a lot of ways. He did the Ocean journey. But he instead he gathered a lot of, but he instead he didn't come back kind of a failed with nothing there at the end of it to see
Or to find you all dead.
yeah, that didn't really happen, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And thousands of years in the past. It's not quite Argentina, but also what you did when you went away was you trained, you upskilled, you gathered, your curiosity led you down. Again, you follow what interested you. You followed something that was so interesting that it spurred on a huge creative output and a creative kind of continuation and continue to learn and seek and answer. And so for me, it was like obviously the Savile Donach story. It's the story of the master of all. And if you go back to the Laur Goala, it's one of the oldest stories. All these peoples come and eventually the best people stay for a good long time. And they're the people of the goddess Danu or the Tua de Danann in Irish mythology. And one of the leaders, ultimately one of the kings of the Tua de Danann was the great one Lu Lá Fada, and we remember Lu Nasa is one of the 4 Celtic calendars. The gathering of Lu, it's also the Irish for August because that's his time in Lu Nasa, and he was the one who was always curious. He was born to fulfill a prophecy of defeating the great Sauron of the evil Balor of the evil eye, who Sauron is based on. Who Sauron is based on. Sorry, and he represents the ideal in kind of kingship and warriorship in a lot of ways, but he is also so intrinsic
kingship and leadership, particularly
leadership.
And
his curiosity is endless, and because he's the master of all, he gathers everything. He's able to be skillful as well as smart and cunning, agile and swift and keen. And every answer he's ever asked, he remembers or every question he's ever asked, he remembers the answer.
And so I decided based on this conversation, and it kind of took me a while to figure this out, I was like, oh, okay, so by me basing my brand on Lu Lá Fada, the like sun god, I'm not saying I am Lu Lá Fada. I'm saying that I'm going to aspire to be as much like this archetype, some of which I'm already embodying, and I'm gonna like strive for that. And to me, even there's like an interesting concept. It's like, why not aim at being like, some kind of ideal version of yourself or pattern in nature, right? And then there was a couple of other things with this. It's kind of like a bit of a perfect trifecta. I'd always also been like so fascinated by the idea that really everything in this biosphere is a creation of light. It's like, it's light energy turned into food through photosynthesis. And so our brand Cresol, people think it means creative solutions. It actually means crea comes from to create in Spanish, and sol means sun. So it means we are created by sunlight. And, Lu Lá Fada was a sun god, and of course all the original gods, especially in countries like Ireland, were seeing that sun come up on the after the solstice or move one jot further over to the north as it came up, was such a momentous thing. And then Lu Lá Fada was he was the sun god responsible for defeating Balor of the evil eye, the one who reduced everything. And 2 weeks ago, we had Diarmuid Ling on here, and the way I met Diarmuid, and it's where me and Cormac met, was Diarmuid had written an article about the ash tree dieback and how this was kind of somehow for him, as a former hurler, a reflection of the sort of cultural malaise that was going on in Ireland, and that we needed to bring back, in a sense, this kind of the Tua de Danann mystical way of seeing things. And that's what prompted me to like reach out to him. Me and Aron are going up there on Thursday to do another event. I met Cormac down there last week, and I don't know, there's just
for any of you who know the music of Pia, P-E-I-A, and Keela, I'm playing with Ronan Snowdon as well. So I'm very excited about it. So yeah.
Very cool.
Unfortunately, I think it'll be over by the time this podcast gets out.
Oh yeah, but maybe you'll hear about them anyway.
I suppose that's just a personal note of this like very interesting weaving of things that like is happening.
Well, it's funny that you said that it took a while to drop, because I think once Sorg and I, the reason we've, been dealing with stories, we tell stories, we teach people stories, yeah, but we also have done a little bit of this kind of branding work with a few friends, really, and we've done it over the
Well,
years
we did it with ourselves
and
on Candlelight
ourselves.
Tales.
But you did it with us because you're
I
back.
did. I took us through it, and we picked Bridget, who is a goddess and a saint, who's very important in the Irish tradition, as both craftsperson and teacher of others.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's why it always fit with us is like she was, inspire through story, inspire, get the cathartic link, get an emotional thing. That's all what performance for me has always been tied up as an actor. But then, oh, actually, there's an educational aspect to telling stories. And like you can't ignore it. It's how kids learn. It's how we've all learned. Third person
mm,
perspective to begin with. It's how you build empathy. It's how you learn the most basic and fundamental things. You watch a story. And those our stories are being hijacked, and you go into Indian mythology, and an awful lot of their stories is good and bad and evil being defeated by positive gods, but it's usually consciousness. And what stories, again, to go back to your first question, what stories are you filling your brain with? What stories are you distracting yourself with? Where are you putting your attention? Because if you put your attention on a plant for a week, that plant will grow a lot because unless you just overwater it. But if you're putting it in soil and if you're giving it nutrients, if you're going and tending to it, if you're there with it, if you're present with it, if you're sitting under it, that is gonna grow. And what you put your attention to grows. And so that's a really fundamental thing of a basic story, but it's also where all of this mythology and Indian lore and Sanskrit is the oldest written language. So it was discovered a long, long time ago. It's a good one to remember, but we keep forgetting because that's what human nature is good at, forgetting and remembering again. I feel like
So you've done this for yourself. You've done it for Neil. Is this a service you offer?
we're trying to kind of, I guess,
yeah,
yeah,
I
it is
mean,
really,
it's
but
a service that we are thinking about offering, and that we have had a kind of like ongoing conversation about, in what way and in what format we would offer that. Because I think our cornerstone has always been, putting the stories back out there and letting people actually experience the stories directly. Um, and also, if people are, if our cornerstone has always been about story first, uh, before anything else.
essentially our business is not maybe the average one. We do an awful lot of varied things, but it's an awful lot of incoming. So again, we take the interesting jobs, things people ask us to do. We're getting a
Yeah,
festival up and all together now, put together that I can't wait to put together with a decent budget. Someone just came to me last week and asked, could he work on a story to tell to his wife up on top of the hill on their Irish um, holiday, and I'm gonna have a few calls with him, and train him up to be able to do that well. We work with storytellers and performers and things, and we've worked with script developers. If people reach out to us, and if anyone listening
yeah.
to the podcast wants to reach out to Candldelit Tales, they can find candlelittales.ie. Our email and contact form is on there. And so we're always interested. Again, if it's a company that is not aligned with our brand ourselves, or we don't agree with a company or something don't want to work with, we'll just decide. But usually that's why we like talking to people who are interested in ecology and biodiversity and permaculture, because these are our tribe too, and it's a nice community.
Well, so the I have some more like just practical questions before we finish. So I
Mhm.
feel like at this point, anyone who knows any like social media people are talking all over on like you gotta get better at storytelling, like become a good storyteller. It's like what are just some like concrete tips for people who may be like novices and who may also be like, especially in permaculture, like getting into maybe doing a bit more public speaking, teaching. What are some ways we can kind of leverage this stuff to like actually command people's attention better and get our points across in a better way?
I think there are two aspects to it. If you break it down, and this is usually how Aaron and myself break it down, there are There is the performance aspect of it, which is a lot to do with stance and projection and like vocal clarity and how to actually hold an audience, regardless of whether that audience is in front of you in person or on a podcast or on a little phone screen or whatever else. There are ways of like presenting yourself and speaking clearly that I think are really, really useful. And then there is another branch of this that has to do with structure. And usually in our courses, we break it down where I talk about the structure and Aron talks about the performance, because that's what we're both good at. So if I were to give people one fundamental, this is how you tell a story, this is what you have to do, I would say a story has a change. This, the status quo in the beginning of your story and the status quo at the end of your story have to be different. Otherwise, you have not told a story. There's got to be a change. There isn't a change. It's just a fucking thing that happened.
Yeah,
and it might not go anywhere.
And you know what? That's one of the big, like, just what came into my head as you said there, because it was like, I hear people do this say all the time with like depressing stuff about the environment, but it's like, to me, I'm always like, summarize all the fucked up stuff that's happening and show me that there's like solutions and a change around this. Don't just like make me listen to an hour and a half of like misery, which is kind of back to that.
And I think that's where people also get into doom scrolling. Like when you're on social media and you're flicking through and you're hearing like depressing facts about the world and like complaints from people about how, the world is not the way they want it to be. I think what people are fundamentally doing is they are looking for the resolution to the story. And all they're hearing is more bits of story, but none of them are coming to a conclusion. So actually give people a conclusion. Give them, and like you said, Neal, give them a thing that they can do is really, really powerful.
Okay, so create a change. Aron, what's your tip to better storytelling?
Well, first of all, to kind of clarify, there are lots of different types of stories, and how you portray your story vastly differentiate how you will perform said story. The difference between stage performance and film, for example, is table tennis and tennis, bigger versus smaller, intimate, and but really, if you were on to something to kind of say, how do I keep someone listening to my story, you essentially have to get their attention, you have to keep their attention, and then you have to make them feel something at the end of it. So there's a hook, a line, and a sinker, but that, really briefly encapsulates tone of voice, speed, dynamic changes, interesting body language, something that's will actually hook attention, something that will give interesting information throughout a presentation or a speech that is giving people both dopamine and maybe a bit of a laugh and maybe a bit of a rest if it's information heavy, and pauses are good too. Rhythm is really important, because if you get stuck into the same rhythm and you keep on saying the same thing, the same way every single time, people will always tune out and not be able to pay attention. So there are lots of aspects to a performance, but if you give it in a dynamic, interesting, captivating way, and you have some information that is interesting to that viewer, you ultimately end with some form of reward that now they know. Hey, now you know this, or that's how we just.
This is so clutch. Like, this now is so usable for like an entrepreneur, because it's like, okay, what are the messages that I want to get out to the people I want to work with, and then how can I like make hooky, retaining, valuable sort of content and messaging around that, so it's like 3 things that if everyone did would cool down the planet, like like hook, and then like something valuable, and then hopefully like I feel better having like found this out or learned this. Like that's a way that I could apply that directly to my permaculture business, and frequently do, by the way. But it's like, it's also just good to like get the reminder. That's just that hook, line, sinker format is like so practical, and we can use it, like I say, to get out messages about permaculture and healing the planet and like all the stuff that we're learning in this container, right?
And you will also hear that hook, line, sinker rephrased in lots of different ways. Story structure is nothing new. We didn't invent it. As types of story theory is, there's supposedly 7, there's probably just 6, but there's lots of theory on story and structure. This is a super condensed way of like going, yeah, just be dynamic and change your voice and be speedy and have
we're doing the condensed thing. We have a whole 4-week course about this, and we have a whole year-long course about this that goes along with the Wheel of the Year and the cycles of the seasons.
Because no matter how much,
this is
but no matter how much we can summarize it, ultimately it does not make a damn difference until you practice it. And it's all very easy to say, oh yeah, I can speed up and change my tone and add a few pauses. But as soon as you add the complication of a narrative and information that you want to get across to somebody, and that hook that you thought of, and that ending that you want to really nail, and those bits of information that you have to put in the right order, that's when you get a monotone person looking cross-eyed at a camera. So you need to practice.
Or reading off a script.
The world's worst thing that I'll never learn.
Well, yeah, this is just like anything, though. It's like if you want to get better at something, know the first principles and then practice. But don't just jump in and practice.
Have some idea of what you're doing and then jump in and just do it.
All right, I better stop. I'm going to stop you there because I don't want to.
We could go on
insanely long here. Cormac, do you have any Cormac or yeah? Well, why don't
I'll just open up the floor. I have one question. But has anybody else got a question they want to ask?
Yeah, please. Otherwise, we'll feel like we've been talking to nobody and a whole screen of blank faces.
There's Andrew. Do you want to ask a question, Andrew? Andrew, do you want to?
How are you getting on, Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, I was particularly interested in how to apply the hero's journey to a business, right? So I have a general understanding of a hero's journey. And I can imagine how you can apply that to like a fictional story, right? But applying it to a business, that seems elusive to me.
That's where understanding your business, taking Neal's information, his journey, his origin story of how he came up with his company, for example, what the meaning of what Lou meant and how to aspire to be Lou Lawfada helped him come up with the name, first of all, for Cresol. And then it helped him go, okay, what are the core values that we share? You join the dots. Like Lou Lawfada is the fictional archetype that you're placing kind of alongside your business's, details.
But I can see the confusion because it can feel abstract. The story of the business can feel abstract, I think, or too abstract for a hero's journey. And so I think it's really important when you are looking at your business's story, remember that it is your story and it is the story of the people involved in your business. It might not just be you. In Neal's case, it's very clearly like his personality was driving the business. Some businesses aren't like that. Some businesses are a group. Some businesses are much more flat. I mean, our business is a partnership.
Yeah.
So it's both of us in it all the time. So we didn't pick an archetype that's either one of us. We picked an archetype that was both of us. We have a hero's journey that involves both of us.
I see. Okay, I think
more about looking at like your company is the people in your company.
And the archetypal structure, like this is the call to action, the meeting the guide, the going into the dark night of the soul, the coming out of, like, if you want to go George Lucas, that's what George Lucas took and made Star Wars out of, and very much copied that step-by-step thing. Not every story fits exactly into it. And people try and shoehorn it in there all the time, and just don't, because Clarissa Pinkola Estes is a brilliant female journey, a feminine journey as well, which is because it doesn't just you can't create a monomyth, and monoculture is a bad idea, so don't fucking do it. And we can all agree on that.
But
for me, 1 second, sorry. For me, it's like using the information that you have lived through in the origin of your business and helping you find those steps in order to find that archetype that then you speak through. And then whatever you find that links in with your business, let's say you're you're selling surfboards, then okay, the god of the sea. There's many of the gods of the sea. Why is the god of the sea? Because you're protecting it. Then you're going to probably become a bit of an activist in some aspect of cleaning the ocean as well as selling surfboards. But you could do both, and your messaging can be very strong in that. And you can have a lot of images that go along with clean ocean and clean
I
living.
think
And you know
I
what I
think
mean?
it is
That's just an
it
example.
is yeah, no, I think it's a good example, and I think that's, Neal was talking about the why of your business being a really, really core thing to understand. And I think understanding who lets you more easily understand why.
And you can pick then, like, the whole idea of that can kind of call is like you pick what archetype, like maybe it is the, you want to get the Greek god of the sea, you want to get the Norse god of the sea, whichever, you pick that character, you pick that ideal that represents that for you, and that can be a collective decision. But then that brand speaks through that voice. And then that messaging, you kind of, if you have a message that you're not sure should you speak out on, you go back to the archetype, you go back to their story, you go back to their stance, and almost their personality, and go, hang on, is this in
Yeah.
line with the value that this god, this archetype?
Which is something that we've done multiple times in
Multiple
Candlelit Tales, of kind of going like, is this, what would Bridget do? Like, is this a Bridget thing to do? Is this
Especially
in
with,
line with that personality? Who's
especially
a pretty wide-ranging personality who does a lot of different things, but like it's a really good way of guiding you through how to grow your business as well.
It's really important, it seems, as well. In Robert Moore talks a lot about this in King, Magician, Warrior, Lover, which is a brilliant book on archetypes for men.
yeah.
But he talks a lot about the importance of, like, as we move forward in our careers and gain more status in the world, and people actually start to project onto us when they see us embodying like the king energy, or the is to realize that, like, you are not the king energy, you're temporarily embodying it, and therefore, like, your time will come and go and you will gracefully move with it, as opposed to doing what so many kings do, which is like try to, become immortal and cling on to it.
Yeah.
And the other thing that
Gilgamesh,
jumps
though, it's an old story. They've been
that's
doing it
a,
for a
well,
long
that's
time.
that's an old story as well. And I think the other thing that I always
That's
think
literally
about
the
this with the
story.
hero's journey is, like, for me, it's also really helped to be like, hang on a second, this environmental crisis, this is like this generation's dragon, and it's a call to action. And, like, you know, we're probably going to, as a species, we're probably going to sort it out, and because that's kind of what we do. And there's gonna be heroes like all of you people who, like, heed the call and, like, get off your asses and do something, and a bunch of people won't, and that's kind of generally what that's generally how it works. So congratulations if you're being moved enough by the current discomfort to actually move, because that's how you ultimately live your most fulfilling life. You don't do what everyone else is doing and just, like, sitting around and hoping things change. You're actually out there, you're actually doing something, and that's kind of essentially what
Being
allows you to build the kind of type of character that lets us stand up to the inevitable tragedy that is life.
Well, you always to me, it's like you be the change you want to see in the world. That's the best quote you've ever given me, and
I
that's
made
always
I made that up.
no, you didn't. And no such thing as a quote, you dick. And we
Is
all
that not a
copy
Raw
it off
Greenfield
somebody.
quote?
Uh,
King, Magician, Warrior, Lover, Laura is the name of that book. It's a great book about, it's written for men, I think, but a lot of women that I know have really enjoyed reading it.
yeah. Women can read books too. It's loud. Sorry.
Carly or Laura, do you have a question? Oh,
I have another question. You were both mentioning the importance of understanding your audience and
Right.
what would be important when you're structuring your storytelling. Specifically, like when you're talking about your business, right, and you're trying to reach a wide audience, how do you, like, what do you use to identify what would be important to the audience?
So I used to work for a branding company many, many years ago, and my manager, my boss there, had a great quote. He said, "Who was the most popular kid at your school? Was it the kid with the clipboard that went around asking everybody what he had to do to be popular, or was it the kid who knew exactly who he was and embodied that really, really strongly?"
It's a
I think
tricky.
it is a kind of a core of this approach as well, that if you are able to figure out that personality and you're able to embody it strongly, you will attract the people that are attracted to that archetype.
Yeah.
And you actually kind of don't really have to overcomplicate it too much beyond that. I think it is useful to know what demographic you are attracting, and if that is actually the demographic that you want to attract. Because if you're embodying an archetype and you're only attracting, 18 to 25-year-olds who have no money, and you're like, no, I want to attract 50-year-old bazillionaires, then you might have to change your approach. So I think analytics are useful in that way, but I actually think you are better off. You're better off figuring out what you are, who you are, and letting people who are attracted to that energy be attracted to you.
I'll add to that. I completely agree with that, because I think fundamentally that's the first grounding step. Once you start looking outside, and I think we were referring to it very much in terms of when you arrive into a live area or a group or an audience that is in front of you. How does that change the dynamic of the story that you're telling? You know very well the story that you will tell your elderly people in your life, be they grandparents or elders, will of whatever night in the summer that you want to tell a story about, will be a very different story that you will tell to your peers, and very different again to the people who tell who are younger, and kind of different if they're opposite people versus hippie people. This kind of, or an alternate group, you tend to be able to, in live situations, very easily just take live edits and leave in details / throw in details that are important, more interesting to a different group. And that's a lot of like the spinning on the dime and being able to live edit and improvise and come up on the spot and give the audience what they need at that time, and specifically what kind of story they need at that time too. In terms of branding specifically to put out on the internet, it is safer, as Sorcha said, to know what messages are authentic to you. Why are they meaningful to you? Why do you want to say them? What hooks are interesting? What do you find funny? Did your video make you laugh? Did your video make you cry in a meaningful way? Or was it moving? If the answer is no, don't put it out there. If the answer is yes, fucking put it out there. But it has to start with you first. If you don't give a shit about it and you're just churning it out, that's why people invented AI, because that's done already and people are doing that. But if you take the time to find out something that's fundamentally meaningful to you and you alone, and you find out what your curiosity is, that is satisfied by your resolution, there are other people that are going to see that too. They're there.
Yeah,
and
you're often your own best guide when it comes to content, if you do the things that are interesting to you.
We had a very funny, like, we've been doing this 11 years. We eventually had a call with like our podcast producers, like, guys, please start putting more attention onto the videos for the love of God, and do this properly. We brainstormed the ideas that Sorcha and I wanted to put out on myths and stories and commentary and fun conversations. And we started off with a few funny videos of me talking to myself, and then Sorcha got into it because she didn't want to be on camera at the start, and then she got into it. And, but it was all just interesting stuff we find interesting. And now we've 20K followers in the last year and a half. Like, that's gone from 7 to 20. Like, it was because it was interesting, and we followed what we were good at, telling stories. But we had to focus on it. We had to put our attention to it, which we weren't doing. And again, we nurtured that plant, and we realized the positive effect that it's had. And we are also teaching ourselves to do this and learning, because as the Brehon Law, it's not codified, it's not an exact science, it is continuously evolving, and we have to integrate and connect with what is going on outside there and let that affect us.
And we should listen to you guys, because these guys built a thriving business and brand about telling Irish stories. Like,
We sell Irish
can do
stories.
that,
We
if
sell
you guys
Irish
can do
stories.
that, we can build our permaculture and regenerative businesses, like hopefully taking some of your wisdom and putting them into that, because
A friend-
your guys' business seems an awful lot more improbable than
A friend of mine,
Our business is fundamentally impossible. We are
it
selling
shouldn't-
Irish stories to
it
Irish
shouldn't
people.
work. Yeah, it shouldn't work
It
at all.
shouldn't work at all. Irish people should be telling us to shut up roundly,
Yeah.
but they
I'm
haven't.
surprised they haven't actually.
when you
Very
get
few
in,
of them have.
yeah, when you get into any niche, anyway, you're like, who? I mean, imposter syndrome comes around everywhere. Who am I to be telling this to anybody?
Yeah.
Who am I to do this?
But I think there's, like, you guys are actually doing something that has is much more concretely beneficial to the world. So
We'll see.
Well, I think we started off together kind of knowing that we could, with this blind trust and this youthful kind of ideal of we can change the world by telling stories. Of course we can. You're still on camera, even though you're trying to. Oh, there you go. Pen and paper there. So, it's over there behind the door. Your iPad was too loud to leave on this podcast in this room because it was echoing. But yeah, we decided we could change the world with storytelling, and we've changed our outlook on the world for the better. I'm not sure we've changed the world yet, but yeah, we're getting there.
we're getting there, little by little.
Listen, Cormac, thank you so much for having us on. If anyone has any questions from listening back to this, you can find candlelittales.ie online.
Are there any other questions before we wrap, or are we wrapping?
But you would tell me to shut up.
No.
Okay. Anyway,
Cormac, I can't hear you.
Cormac, you've gone silent.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I switched my mic off. The kids run.
there we go.
If you do your outros and have one question, just
sorry.
afterwards. I might not put it on, but we'll see. So guys, thanks very much. It's been great having you on. A lot to learn, and a lot for us to take away and apply to your own our own storytelling. So any final thoughts? Any?
No, just like psyched to have you guys on here. This is awesome. I'm looking forward to doing some just more jamming on this topic of like storytelling and telling stories that actually empower people and get us to focus on fixing shit and getting along with each other, for God's sake.
It's all in.
That's been the Permaculture Vine Podcast, and we'll chat to you all next week.